You know, a good way to see the difference between moderns and postmoderns is to look at their stories. And the modern has what he would term, or what literary people term, a meta-narrative. And all it means is that there is a meta-narrative. There is the big story called history. And that big story has certain discernible parts to it that are mimicked in little micro-narratives, or little narratives that happen within the larger story. But those little micro-narratives do nothing but mimic the bigger story, which is true. It's a very true concept. However, the way that the modern implements it, and particularly pushes it upon his child, or imposes it upon the postmodern generation, is wholly inadequate and can cause, and has actually contributed to major fractures. Now keep this in mind. Remember, we said that moderns tend to have a mechanistic portion to them that they really haven't analyzed. They've not asked themselves, why do I think this way? It's just kind of the context in which they have been raised. And so mechanics always will have number attached to it. And if it's something that can be numbered, it's something that can be further categorized according to the visual, according to the activity that we can observe, and we can go on and on. There's many different ways to categorize. And the modern naturally does that. So when it comes to the meta-narrative, the modern truncates the meta-narrative, because he doesn't look at it in its broad implications. He truncates it, and he imposes that truncated meta-narrative upon all smaller micro-narratives. So imagine this. You have a parent, and that parent believes that, we'll just call them the Joneses. And I know some of you out there are probably the Joneses, but we'll call them the Joneses. The modern Mr. and Mrs. Jones come to their child and they say, we are Joneses. There are certain things that we do not do. There are certain things that you will not do because you are a Jones. And that's okay, because the parents are the parents. But if they take that attitude and they widen it, and they really impose it upon a much larger and larger territory, meaning they impose it upon other humans, not only themselves and their families, but also the church and the state, and they really do see through a lens like that, what happens is that they eventually end up with a small narrative, okay, that is only relevant to people who agree with them, and they end up ignoring the rest of the world. They end up excommunicating the rest of the world. That's one of the reasons why it's very important to understand that the plurality is very, very important, and diversity is very, very important, because diversity does not hold us at bay. It does not force us to hold our opinions or our belief systems at bay. It helps us to see them in ever-enlightening lights. And so the postmodern child does not like his genetic inheritance, because along with that genetic inheritance, there are certain things that the Joneses do and do not do. And he doesn't like the idea that he is predetermined to do certain things that he of his own will does not choose to do. It's very important to understand this. That's one of the reasons I've argued why tattooing and why marking their skin or otherwise disfiguring themselves is one common trait of the postmodern. He thinks that the genetic inheritance he has, being material, is too truncated to really express who he is as a person. He doesn't see himself as an individual within that people group, so he has to distinguish himself. You guys are familiar with the whole concept of circumcision and with the promise of making Israel a new nation, if, of course, they took on the sign of circumcision. And that's pretty much what postmoderns do nowadays. They will alter themselves in many different ways. Spiritually, they will alter themselves. They will take on faiths that are very foreign to the particular family in order to distinguish themselves. They will take on political ideologies that are very, very different from their families, in order to distinguish themselves. They will mark themselves with tattoos. They will cut themselves. They will do any various number of things in order to distinguish themselves from the stifling meta-narrative that threatens to suffocate them.